I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you for joining us for one of our talks today. Today, we're incredibly lucky to be joined by the wonderful Russell Howard to talk all about his Netflix special Lubricant, as well as his Netflix documentary Until the Wheels Come Off, and his current television show, The Russell Howard Hour. And I wanted to start by talking about the transition that you obviously had to make alongside everybody and everybody within the comedy world when we went into the shutdown, which you touch upon a lot in your documentary Until the Wheels Come Off, and how you really had to evolve the way that you worked. But in terms of the comedy, it's so much about that connection with the audience, that immediacy of feedback, and it really informs a lot of the delivery and the rhythm and the timing. And you can do the same show 10 nights in a row, and it's a completely different show every night. And how did you navigate that side of comedy and delivery within performance when you had to go into lockdown and you were doing everything without that immediacy of feedback and without audience connections in the same way?
What an absolutely outstanding question. Honestly, mate, I've done so many interviews with people, and normally it's like, so what's the worst heckle you've ever had? But the depth to that is, I don't know how I'm going to answer it. It was a magnificent question. But basically, I think most people had to completely recalibrate how they worked. And if you are the kind of comic that performs with an audience rather than for, certainly in terms of creation. So I kind of had to change the way that I worked and try and write things long form and feel a kind of a rhythm through no other purpose other than trying to find something to do during the long hours of nothingness. Do you know what I mean? The inertia of particularly the first lockdown where you're like, will this ever come back? And the idea of doing a Zoom gig and suddenly being judged for how messy your bedroom was, or, or hearing that, that very small, kind of like a Wookiee fart laugh that you heard, this tiny thing, it sort of wasn't enough. So I sort of focused on this kind of future world where you would have an audience again. So I was like trying to, like a comedy squirrel, trying to kind of find all these kind of funny nuts that I could fling to the imagined audience in the future. That was it. I've always had that thing where I have to kind of write with an audience in mind. I've been offered like sort of autobiographies and to write books, but the idea of just settling down to entertain yourself first and foremost, I've never been able to do. So I had to have this imaginary crowd in my head and then kind of sort of feel the rhythms of stuff and say it out and that kind of thing, really.
Yeah.
Do I get close to answering that brilliant question? Is that all
No,
right?
that was a wonderful answer.
Good.
And the one space that I did want to talk about when it comes to, audience heckles is, again, it's such a fascinating thing to watch a comedian on stage when those moments happen, because you have an entire show that you've been working on for months or years. You've been really honing that material, and there's a very specific flow to it. And when
Yeah.
someone comes in and heckles, that completely breaks up the rhythm and
Yeah.
also completely changes the tone of the moment. And so you then in the moment have to figure out, am I acknowledging this? How am I acknowledging this? And then
Yeah.
how are you steering the conversation and almost creating sub content in the middle to go back to the moment that you were at before? And that's a real skill set that, every comedian has to contend with. And when you started out within the comedy industry, what was that journey for you of really learning that specific flow and how to really create it? Because I've seen you do it in person, and you were
Yeah.
fantastic with it.
Well, that was what I was good at straight away. So I was really good at kind of liquid funny and being able to chat with the crowd and sort of do that. And then I found the transition. My material was never as funny as I was early on. So everyone always used to say about me of like, oh, as soon as he learns how to write, he's going to be okay. But I was like 18 when I started. So, you know what I mean? It would be fairly strange if I was coming in with all these lofty ideas about sort of sociology and politics. So I found that bit very easy. I found the transition to material tricky. And then subsequently, when I started doing arenas, it's that weird thing. If there's like 15,000 people there, it sort of has to be this sort of all conquering monologue in a way that in a smaller club, it doesn't. But I love that when it kind of gets interactive. And in fairness, a lot of the gigs I do in America, because I'll do kind of like sort of, smaller rooms are sort of like like somewhere between like 500 and 1,000 seaters. So they're kind of a bit more intimate compared to sort of arenas in the UK. And I love that, being able to sort of blend it into the show. And I think it then makes it special. It's just that thing, particularly when you're trying to do a comedy special, you have to have a thing planned. And it's almost like, my heart always sinks a bit when you see a comic go on stage and straight away they go to the front row and they're like, hey, so what do you do? And you're like, well, someone hasn't got enough stuff. Whereas if it happens naturally, like there's a bit in the special actually where this guy shouted out, and I can't remember exactly, but I think he goes, "You're a fucking legend." Such an English sort of heckle, because it's like, it sounds nice, but it was really, you like, it was properly aggressive. "You're a fucking legend," and I was sort of, and then it sort of led to this whole idea of like, you don't really see like geezers in like sort of in typically legend style films like King Arthur and stuff like that. It's always that type of English voice, you know. The geezers are always in the gangster films, but you know, you very seldom have somebody talking like that. So it kind of got into this whole idea of like, I would love to see like a geezer in like Star Wars. And so it's this whole thing of like this sort of Cockney bloke going, "You're not my fucking dad, you fucking numpty," whatever. And him sort of turning to the camera and going, "Oh no, boys, I've only tried to fuck my sister." So it was this kind of funny little thing from nowhere that I was then able to blend back into the show. And that's kind of like one of my sort of little skills. Once I've got the material, I've always been quite good at keeping the kind of plate spinning a bit. Do you know what I mean? In terms of having that nice mix, because I don't really like hitting people. If someone, because very often people don't heckle, they're giddy, and they kind of want to be involved in some way. So that guy, it was nothing derogatory. He was just happy. Sort of in terms of hitting somebody hard with a heckle, I don't really like doing that, because it then scares everybody in the crowd, and there isn't that potential for kind of liquid funny where you kind of get to like a really special place, and the audience know you're not there's such an immediacy when you conjure funny from nowhere, because they're like, "Holy shit, this is happening, we're here." It really creates a moment. So I'm kind of always on the lookout for that, rather than trying to exterminate it. Do you know what I mean? With that shut up. So I kind of, yeah, I don't mind it. It's just yeah, and particularly when you're starting a new set, it's really fun because you have that nice to and fro with the audience, you know.
Yeah. I also want to talk about Kumar Kamalagran, who
Oh,
features
the mighty,
yeah,
yeah,
who features in your documentary and is a crucial part to your team in terms of putting the
yeah,
shows together. And you've really used the documentary to show a lot of the process and a lot of the details that come in, because when people come to one of your shows, they're only seeing you on stage, but you have people like Kumar, you have James Taylor in the documentary talking about, your collaboration, who first
yeah,
signed you when you were younger.
yeah,
But with Kumar in particular, one thing that really comes across is how much you yourself are also thinking about not just the material that you're delivering, but the necessity for the show to really deliver an experience for the audience. And so in terms of your live shows, but also the special that you filmed, what are those key components that are the most important to you in creating that experience for the audience when you're thinking about staging, when you're thinking about lighting, when you're thinking about how is the director going to film this special? What's the experience that I want the audience to have at home as well as in
yeah.
the room?
I kind of, to be honest, I leave all the sound down to Kumar and the lighting, because he's so good at it. And he does like these hour-long sound checks to make it just so. And then in terms of the feeling you want them to leave with, you just want them to have belly laughs and a feeling of kind of warmth and togetherness. That was the thing from the show. It was just like, right, we're here, we're out, let's have it. And you kind of just want to go on and kind of pull up trees. So I've never really been that kind of comic where it's kind of quite small and thoughtful, and and but there's bits of it that are, but fundamentally it has to be surrounded by this kind of wall of noise. That's what I like. I love the kind of the orchestral and just getting it going, so you're in this kind of amazing rhythm. And Kumar is the greatest, because he's not only is he technically, it's his show. He is, you know, he kind of, if there's a little glitch in sound, he's always there. So his ability to make a room playable is extraordinary. So you then go to this room and you don't have to worry about the sound being bad or the light being bad, because you have this expert in his field. It's a really weird thing in TV, I don't know, and stand up. In the world of entertainment, I imagine it's the same in America. There's this awful phrase of talent. So they refer to people in front of the camera as talent. And it's such a disgusting, myopic view, because it's like, what are you talking about? There's a camera guy, I don't know how to operate a camera. There's a sound engineer, I can't do that. There's a lighting girl. There's all these people that make the show, and there's so much of it, particularly with a TV show and also a live show, that it's a collaboration. And not only is Kumar brilliant at his job, he's kind of one of my best mates, and a real kind of wise head, and has toured with rock bands, and has a really interesting perspective on the universe. But then also, my security on our British tour is a guy called Pete, has a completely different worldview to me. And that is a really interesting way of creating while you're on tour as well, because you have such a different collection of people around you that you're sort of churning through stuff, but it isn't this bubble of kind of shared thought. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I quite like surrounding myself with people that are different, as it were.
We also get the chance to see a little bit of your writing process through the documentary as well, and you kind of describe it as when you're first writing a show that it's just suggestions until that moment where it's in front of an audience. But there's also that process of, writing observations, writing certain material, and then really thinking about the overall narrative flow, particularly when you're doing a special. There has to be a real linearity in the way that it all threads together. Whereas when you're doing a 10-minute set, it can be kind of 2 or 3 different fragmented pieces. And so what does that part of the process, when you're kind of almost creating that tipping point from it being suggestions into material and really finessing the narrative thread and that overarching arc that you want to capture?
Yeah, well, it's just trial and error that you initially start. That's why I love stand up. You have these kind of suggestions, these little hypotheses, and you think, oh, is this funny? And then the audience help you push it to a funnier place because they agree with you through laughter, and then you go down this rabbit hole. And then once a bit becomes kind of crystallized, it's then sort of almost a bit like Tetris, where you go, okay, where does that best fit? What is that about? What else am I thinking that is sort of connected to that? And then it becomes completely trial and error, that you put it there, nope, and you do it one night like that, and you do it another night, and until it becomes this kind of feeling, and you want it to be like water running over rocks, where it's never like, again, like, it's when people come on and go, hi, this show, like, they don't even say hello. It's like, the show is about, do you know what I mean? And you go, geez, this is just such a written thing that you are now reading from your head. It's about those hours in comedy clubs, so that it's first and foremost comedy club funny, but then it has a sort of a narrative behind it. But like you say, do you know what I mean? If you walk on in a comedy club late night and you go, I guess the show is about, it's like, you're just going to be destroyed. I also find there's quite a lot, maybe it doesn't happen so much in the States, but there's a lot of people that just go on and the show is about, and you're like, is it? How about we just figure out what it's about rather than telling me? Do you know what I mean? But that's a real bugbear of mine. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
And within your comedy special, you use your comedy so consistently to speak to the cultural moment, to speak to very specific details of what's happening now. And obviously, even the fact that you were going to tape that special before the pandemic set in, and you're taping it now. And so it does include a lot of content about what we've all been through in the last 1.5 to 2 years as well. And yet it also feels like if someone were to watch this 5 years from now, that it wouldn't feel dated. And so what is that balance for you in finding jokes and finding comedy that feels very timeless, but also feels very timely, but also feels incredibly timeless? Because even the way that you talk about the current political climate, you find that way of making a joke about Boris Johnson that, again, will still be funny in 5 years. And if you haven't read the papers in the last week, still completely makes sense to an audience now.
Yeah. Well, mainly through sort of watching George Carlin, or, like mostly him, or like someone like Billy Connolly. That's kind of those, I think someone like George Carlin is such a forever funny comedian that you see bits of, his stand up on YouTube from like, you know, the 90s that could have been written last week. And it's about like trying to take a long lens to stuff, you know, and sort of say, okay, what is this about, you know, and what is the theme behind this, or what's the emotion behind it? And that phrase "forever funny," that's something I'm definitely heading towards and getting better at, because you do want to make it something that people can watch again, and can watch again in a few years' time. And if you're very specific about, hey, do you remember when, you know, X happened, and you know, you know, and she said this, and remember he said that, it's a bit like, I don't quite know what you're driving at. And maybe that's because I've done, you know, sort of 200 shows of my own topical comedy show, so I sort of know, weirdly, you can see the cyclical nature of the news, and you see what comes back. And even the whole kind of thing about kind of cancel culture and all that. I've got an album from Lenny Bruce where a priest wrote to him, that he has on the back of the album. And this priest is saying, I didn't think what you did was obscene at all. I thought it was great. So that conversation has clearly been going on forever. But we always think, our culture in this moment, we always think that we are the founders of anything. Do you know what I mean? And that it's never happened before, and that there's never been, you know, stupid leaders or tyrannical leaders or moments of despair. There's such kind of, you know, constants. And that's the thing I want to do next, is try and make a thing that's so like deeply human, that everyone can enjoy, without pushing into like a right wing or a left wing thing. Do you know what I mean? I just think it's really important. If I had Steve Martin's ability with balloon animals, I'd be all over that now. Do you know what I mean? Just something like, I think it's, yeah, that's what I tried to do with this special. You try and make it like a love letter to laughter, so that irrespective of what you think, one thing we can all agree on is, when you're lost in laughter, it's a truly special place to be. And for whatever reason, it's been contaminated and demonized. Like, the only time you see ever, the only time comedy makes the news at the moment is when people, like, it's, you know, audience horrified at comedian's joke. It's never like, you know, audience watches comedian and thought she was brilliant. Like, that's never it's never in the news. And that's how most people are. Do you know what I mean? You know, crowd watched Taylor Tomlinson, thought she was really brilliant. It's like, well, that's not going to generate any clicks, is it? So, you know, you just have to trust that laughter is deeply human and will always be desired, but it doesn't make the news, you know.
Yeah. And you were mentioning Billy Connolly there, who's obviously been a huge influence to you comedically.
Yes.
And you recently had the opportunity to interview him on your
Mm.
show. And there's
Yeah.
so many different spaces that you traverse within the interviews that you do on your show, and was interested in kind of what that looks like for you in terms of your process and preparation, because when you're interviewing someone like Billy Connolly that you've looked up to and you followed his career your entire life, you know, I imagine that it's more about kind of culling down the things that you're going to ask him, because you already
Yeah.
know so much and there's such a broad landscape that you could dive into.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, that's a very different style of interview for you versus, you know, Katie Piper and talking about very serious topical issues, or Susie Dent
Yeah.
coming on and talking about Countdown.
Yeah.
And so before you're going into these interviews, how are you navigating and really thinking about what that landscape's going to be, what you want it to be? Because at the same time, there are certain beats and moments that you need to land on with these interviews, either because it's like, you know, we've got a Twitter graphic of something that we're going to talk about, you know, we're talking about Billy Connolly's book coming out. So there are certain things that you also have to navigate into that conversation.
Yeah. I think first and foremost, we only have people on the show that I think are interesting. So there's kind of a bunch of people that we're like, even if they're popular, it's like, I'm not really sure what's beneath them. But it's really exciting when you find something beneath somebody. And if I find somebody intriguing, or they've done something fascinating, or there's something they've said, I can kind of latch onto that, whether I don't know them, you know, particularly, but I can kind of go, oh, wow, that's really interesting. Oh, shit, did they do? Do you know what I mean? So it's like we interviewed Matthew McConaughey, and I only knew Matthew McConaughey as all right, as that guy, you know, great actor. And then I listened to his book and I just thought it was really interesting. And so given that he told me his life story through the audiobook, I approached him as if I was approaching him at a bar and was like, hey, that bit when you went to the rainforest, that was pretty fascinating. And you went there because you had a wet dream. I mean, what I'm curious about is, did you say that to the travel agent? Or so instantly they go, oh, okay, this guy knows my story, he's interested in me, and there's a sort of a joke to kind of suggest that it's lighthearted, you know. So that's what I would do in terms of guests, where I'm trying to get something from them. And then specifically with Billy Connolly, the main thing was just, it's like, how do you put into words what he means to you? And that's what I was trying to get across. And it was, he's just got the most beautiful face, the most beautiful brain. And you kind of, my main aim with that interview was to not freak him out, you know, so that he would not like turn to his wife and go, can we get rid of this? Because I'm feeling a bit, do you know what I mean? I'm feeling a bit awkward. But because I was so complimentary of him, but I didn't know what to do, because like, particularly in Britain, like, that man has given, honestly, the moments he's given the nation, it really, it will be such a sad day when he passes. Hopefully it's in many years. But I've literally seen firsthand, I've seen my dad, my granddad, my mum, my sisters, my aunties, my uncles lost in laughter, like doubled over. And he gave all these moments. So specifically what I wanted to do with that chat was to let him know just how much he meant to people. That was kind of my aim. And I guess there's always, that's the thing, you want to go, oh, Susie Dent, I really like the fact that you're into words, isn't it? And like, what are your favorite phrases? Isn't language fantastic? Okay, and it's sort of, you sort of play within that realm, you know. So that was the main thing of, let's play, let's chat, because you're interested in English language. So let's discuss where does the phrase tear you in a new arsehole come from? Like, why do we say boo to a goose? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, and then you're literally with an expert that will go, well, actually, it's because of this. And you're like, oh, right. You know, so you can feel the audience listening as if they're listening to an interesting chat in the pub, rather than, so, you know, what's your showbiz anecdote? And how do I set you up for that? Because I feel like that, particularly in the UK, with our big chat shows, that's all it's been for 5 years now. And you just sort of sense people, particularly podcasts, they're just sort of done with it, because you feel them roll out their big showbiz story again, and you go, yeah, kind of had that, you know what I mean? So, yeah.
And in making the show week by week, you have about 10 minutes at the beginning that stand up and current commentary on things. And obviously, one of the things that a lot of shows that are diving into that realm have faced over the last few years is just that the news landscape just moves faster and faster and faster and faster. So there's a real necessity when you're creating segments like that to start finessing what you want it to be, but also create something that's incredibly fluid and incredibly malleable. And even, you know, I've been to tapings of shows where they're holding the audience in the holding room because they're doing a last minute rewrite, running it through legal, getting it in the teleprompter. And for you, what does that look like behind the scenes in terms of how tight you want it to be, the point at which you really feel like it needs to be locked in, and then what sort of things you're willing to open that back up again for?
Yeah, we write up, so we record it. The record normally starts 6:30, and we're very often kind of going through the script at 6, like as into the last minute, just because you go, is there a smoother way of saying it? And then you sort of just have to make your piece. If something breaks after the show, it's just kind of one of those things. But the main thing is to try and have, you know, I write the show with there's 5 of us that write the show now together, and we're all mates, and it's such a fun collaborative experience that really feels like that I'm, you know, a front man of a band, because we write the songs together, you know. And it's like, okay, what do we think it is, this or that? And there's lots of, you know, on Zoom where we kind of talking back and forth, and that's the main thing, where you kind of, you smooth it and you feel it kind of come together. And we used to do it in front of an audience on a Sunday to prepare, but now because of kind of COVID, we sort of had to go to just doing it live, which is, I know what they do in the States. Like I remember seeing John Oliver's show, and I was like, it was the smoothest machine I've ever seen. Like John's an old mate of mine. I was like, holy, like the whole show was done in like 40 minutes. It was like unbelievable. Whereas ours is very often 2 hours where, you know, we'll do the stand up, but it's like 15 minutes for 10 minutes. And then the interviews are like 40 minutes each for like 15 minutes because, you know, I have a bit of a ramble. But yeah, we try and make it a really pulsating live show for the people in the room, and then hopefully that kind of transforms for people at home. And then what's really happened in the last couple of years is that now everything can be sort of compartmentalized for social media. Do you know what I mean? So you then go, okay, how can this, like, you know, we have sort of a team that go, right, we could cut that bit and that goes there and that goes to Facebook and that goes to Instagram. What about this for YouTube? And it's, you know, kind of weird. I don't really get involved in that. I'm just like, yeah, fine. Yeah, cool. I don't really know which works.
And in terms of your relationship with the work that you do, in the documentary, you're very open and very forthright about your relationship with success as a comedian. And I don't mean that in terms of large milestones, but that moment where you're doing a show, you go out on stage, you tell a joke, and maybe the audience isn't giving you the response that you anticipated, or even the response that an audience 5 nights in a row prior did, and kind of what that feels like. And do you feel like you've had a real evolution over the years in terms of reconciling and recalibrating within that space, where if something, when you're striving for perfection, doesn't quite reach there, that it used to kind of feel like it wasn't a success, but finding different ways in which those small moments where something doesn't quite land, that you can kind of just move through them, and how do you traverse those sorts of spaces differently from the way that you used to?
Well, that is I'm in a state of becoming as far as that's concerned, because it's like that I have to fix that, because it's such a weird thing. If you come off stage, you know, at Wembley and there's 15,000 people there and you're like, fuck's sake, why did I that bit? But that's just within me, and I'm getting better at going, it's fine, it's all good, you know, as I think everyone else is. You know, we're all sort of the pandemic really gave us oceans of hours to sit with ourselves and sort of go, okay, right, where are we? Are we totally cool with the way our brains work? Right, should we try and fix this? Because, you know, this car's been running pretty fast for 40 years now, so maybe put some new fuel in. So yeah, I'm trying to get better with it, and not let my art destroy me, but nurture me. Do you know what I mean? That's kind of where I want to get to. But it's because I get so excited by ideas, and I know I can do them well. And if it doesn't go well, I will always blame myself rather than the audience. I always think it's a failing of mine, and more often than not, it is. But it's only when you sort of think about it, you go, oh, I didn't really tell them what I was joking about. I just said all the punchlines. I didn't really tell them, okay, that's what that is, you know, because you're too excited, you know. So yeah, trying to get better.
You also spent a lot of the pandemic revisiting kind of every note that you'd ever made in your phone, and looking at old things that you'd scribbled down that maybe never made it to fruition as a full piece. And was that a journey for you about mining that for material, or really just kind of revisiting and having almost a discovery of the trajectory that you've taken as a comedian over the years?
It was purely to give myself homework, like when faced with nothingness. So, you know, being at home, like, you know, in the pandemic and not having gigs to go to, I was like, oh, I'm going to need something to do. And it just hit me one day. I was like, I'm reading the news a lot here, and I wonder if I can go through, because I've got so many notes, as all comics, probably all creatives have. Like my friend is a singer, and he's got so many sort of half-written songs. He was like, oh, what's that? Yeah. So he was doing that. And because we're pals, we would chat about a thing that from like 2017, I was in like Germany, and just they had a specific example is what was it? It was that was it. It was a luxury, it was the most German thing. It said luxury bondage shop. like that. And I was just kind of, I remember just seeing it in 2017, just go, Jesus Christ, kind of. So, and I just made a note of it. And then, so I sort of spent like a day in the middle of the pandemic, lost in thought about why would you want some, if you're getting hit with a thing that's got diamonds in, surely that would be, you know, oh, do you don't want to ruin your diamonds? And sort of, so I wrote this kind of little bit that may be funny when I tour Germany. Do you know what I mean? But just for something to do rather than kind of sit and watch the news and despair. I kind of literally would give myself little jobs, knowing that, oh yeah, I've got this gigs in Germany in a couple of years, that'll be fine. So do you know what I mean? Or I go, oh yeah, I've got that, that'd be quite funny. Well, that connects to that. And because I love it, it's like this jigsaw, this interesting jigsaw that doesn't it hasn't tired me. So a day would go by and I would go, oh, it was really good fun because I was kind of lost in it, you know. And that's my mindset. I can really get lost in like a day of kind of thinking about funny thoughts, even if it's from a few years ago, because I can remember being there and go, yeah, it's really weird, isn't it? Why is it not called Pimp My Gimp? Yeah, it should be called Pimp My Gimp. So do you know what I mean? It's kind of those little jokes. It was just quite nice to sit with them rather than, I don't know, try and learn Spanish or kind of watch Tiger King. I would watch TV at night, but during the day I tried to kind of write, you know.
Yeah. Well, I'm always so impressed by everything that you do comedically and creatively. And so it's been
Oh,
such a
thank you.
pleasure to hear more
I,
about your process with all of this. Thank you so much, Russell.
that was such a great interview. Thank you. You're amazing. That was really, I really enjoyed that. Absolute treat. Take care. See you later.